Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaskar. You have stepped into a course that is going to change the way that you look at data. Not just how you analyze it, but also how you communicate it. My name is Nivid Desai. I serve as the Program Executive at Writing Studio IIT Gandhinagar. Welcome to Writing for Data Science. This course is at the intersection of analysis and communication. As all of us know, data analysis is not just about coding and models. It is about solving real-world problems. And that is exactly why every single thought that goes into solving those problems needs to be communicated. And not just to one audience, across multiple stakeholders. That is where this course comes in. This course prepares you with the foundations of writing, especially curated for data science. We will discuss audience analysis, critical thinking, logical reasoning, as well as storytelling that is native to data science. So join me on a journey at the intersection of numbers and narratives. I'll see you in class. Namaskar, hello, and welcome to another lecture of Writing in Data Science. I'm Nivid Desai, and this is a class where we are exploring the intersections of numbers and narratives. In the past lecture, we explored the overview and the importance of writing within the realm of data science across different fields and disciplines. We saw what different kinds of documents that we would need to write, what different kinds of outputs we may see if we practice writing within the realms of data science. And we also saw the justification. Why is it important? What kind of qualities should we aspire for as writers, as communicators, and data science professionals? Let's take that journey forward. In today's class, we will look at some of the key approaches that we must have as thinking, critical thinkers and writers within the realm of data science. We may need to acquaint ourselves with a few bits of technicality before we move on. So before I introduce you to these approaches, I must introduce you to the process of communication. Communication is obviously an exchange between the sender and the receiver. The sender sends the message, the receiver receives, understands, and interprets the message. So, in a technical sense, if I may introduce you to a bit of jargon, the sender is known as an encoder, and the receiver, you might have guessed it, is known as a decoder. An encoder must encode the message to the decoder's augmentation of understanding. And that's where good communication takes place. You might have heard of the terms miscommunication or communication gap. That usually happens when the sender or the encoder's understanding of the message varies from that of the decoder or the receiver. Now, of course, it is a utopian understanding to aspire that both of them will be always on the same page. It is virtually impossible to expect that. But we as communicators, we as senders, as encoders, can always aspire to empathize with the decoder and understand what kind of a message would work for them. And that's precisely the kind of approaches that we are going to discuss in today's lecture. So let's move on to the key approaches to writing in data science. Today, I'm going to introduce you to 5 key approaches to writing process in data science. Let's begin with point number 1. Start with the end in mind. We know this as the outcome-driven writing process. This is where you take care of the outcome. Mind you, not the output, but the outcome, the result, the resultant effect that the reader receives from your writing. And that's where you augment your entire writing process, your language, your content, the density of information within your draft to ensure that the reader is not lost. All of this is augmented towards the reader's understanding of what your message is trying to convey. So you always have an end goal and end outcome in mind, and then you reverse engineer your entire writing draft to ensure that there is as little scope for miscommunication as possible. Then we move on to adopting a first principles approach. I'll come to that in a moment. It needs a little bit of a discussion, and we will learn what a first principles approach really means. Point number 3 is iterative writing and revision. I often tell my students that you cannot grow grass and cut it at the same time. The first draft is not the last draft. The point of the first draft is to not get it right, it is to get it done, to have all the information on the page and then work through it in iterations, work through it in cycles of revision and edits. Point number 4, to emphasize reader-centric writing. You might have heard about UI and UX, right? User interface and user experience. Think of this in terms of RI and RX, reader interface and reader experience. You have to augment your writing to ensure that the reader is at the center of the reading experience. This is where your empathy, your connection with your reader as a writer comes into being. You cannot dissociate or separate yourself as the sender and encoder of the message from the receiver or the decoder of the message. You are both two ends of the same spectrum. So you have to ensure that for your message to work to the best of its capacity, you have to emphasize reader-centric writing. And in the end, we'll talk about engaging in data storytelling with a logical flow. Data storytelling has to ensure that there is an underlying logic that may be invisible, but it surely works. There is no loose gap of logic throughout your entire narrative that you may weave with the numbers and statistics at your hand. So let's dive in. Just like the last lecture, for today's lecture as well, we have divided our discussion for each of these points into two separate parts: purpose and process. Why should we employ each of these approaches? What is the purpose of that approach? And the process, how do we actually apply it? So you might find some resonance in the style of our arrangement of information from the previous lectures, and you can expect the same in the upcoming lectures as well. There will be a methodical way through which we will explore these points and these ideas. Point number 1, starting with an end in mind, an outcome-driven writing approach. The purpose of this is understanding the desired outcome of the document. Whether you are writing a report, a proposal, or policy, you have to start by clarifying the key message or action that you want your audience to take. Now, I can understand whether you do not have that call to action feature as the very first sentence. I don't mean that. In your mind, as a temperament of a writer, you must ensure that you have an entire purpose, an entire key message or action clear, so that your whole messaging is augmented towards that key message or towards that key action, so that no word or no sentence or no paragraph is wasted. No paragraph makes your audience take a detour or a distraction from the information that you are catering them. This reverse engineering method ensures that every part of the writing aligns with the final objective. Like I said, there is no stray paragraph, there is no stray sentence that is not talking about exactly what you want your reader to know or to do. So how do we actually put this in practice? What is the process? First of all, you define the objectives. Before writing, before you put the word down on paper, ask yourself, what should the reader know or do after reading this? If this one question cannot be clear in your mind, it does not serve us well to start writing and go in different directions and waste our own time as creators, to be honest. So this is where you start developing the temperament of a writer, the clarity of thought that we talked about in the previous lecture as well. You define the objectives and ask yourself, what is it that the reader would need to know or do when they read the last word of your document? Clearly define the goals of the document, whether it is to inform or whether it is to persuade or to request action. The goal of a document may be a wide range of things, right? You don't always need to educate, you don't always need to inform. Sometimes you want your readers to take action. You want your readers to be convinced about a point. Depends on what the goal of the document is. You can augment the tone, you can augment the vocabulary and the way of delivery. So you must define the objective, the core focus of the document before beginning to put the first word down on paper. Then you map the key insights. Once the objectives are set, you identify the main insights or results that will support the outcome. This ensures that the writing stays focused on delivering the most relevant information. All of this, if you may have noticed, serves one single goal. Do not waste your readers' time. Do not make them go on different tangents and detours and expect them to come back and understand the message that you want to deliver them. The point is to keep them centered on the objective that we have decided since the very beginning. So, what do you do then? You structure your entire document around impact. You organize the document to highlight the key results and recommendations early on, especially in reports and executive summaries. Remember executive summaries? We discussed them in the previous lecture. We talked about how if somebody does not have the time to go through an exhaustive bunch of information in your report, you have this short section in the beginning known as an executive summary. So they can just skim through it and get the highlights, the core messaging of your document. That is how you ensure that each section serves the overall purpose, the outcome that you want your reader to have. Then we arrive at the second point, to adopt a first principles approach. I understand that this may be a new terminology, this may be a new toolkit for all of us to explore. Let's see what the first principles approach actually means. The first principles approach is a fundamental method of breaking down complex problems into their most basic elements. An entire cluster of information is a unit of knowledge. If you want to communicate that unit of knowledge to your reader, they may not be always equipped with the kind of know-how, the kind of wherewithal to understand it whole and soul. So think of it like a ball. You have to remove each string and explain them principle by principle and weave it all together, tie it all back towards the end, so that your audience not only understands but also internalizes the message that you want to deliver to them. That's what a first principles approach truly embodies. In data science writing, this translates into explaining concepts from the ground up, ensuring clarity and a deep understanding of the subject. This is where you cannot take for granted that your audience may understand every jargon that you use. So you might have to make sure that every time that you use a jargon or every time that you use a technical term, define it, follow it up with an explanation, or use a metaphor, use an analogy. This is where the reader also feels acknowledged. In case if they are heightening up their curiosity with their reading experience, this will ensure that you also know that they are curious to learn with you and you don't talk down to them from a position of authority or a position of knowledge. A first principles approach is the most humbling experience for the reader and the most assuring that the writer has taken their needs into account while drafting the entire document. How do we actually get down to business? Let's see the process. We deconstruct complex ideas. I understand that data analysis and data science is a fairly complex field. There is enough and more jargon, enough and more technical terms that you might need your audience to know before they start their reading journey. But you start by simplifying the problem or the data science method that you have employed to communicate the deeper ideas in future. Then you break down the jargon, the technical terms, or complex models into simple, understandable parts. You might have seen some documents or some books that have a glossary at the beginning. Have you seen something like that? Yeah, that glossary is a mind map of what the reader must understand. So every single time that they turn the page and they come to a word that they don't understand, they can come back to the glossary and understand that, use that as a reference point. A glossary is a good tool to do exactly the kind of approach that we are discussing here right now. Or you can use a footnote. Below the page, you can add remarks of what each of these technical terms mean and follow them up with definitions, examples, or explanations. Like I said, you can use analogies and metaphors as well. In case if you're not writing a formal document or a technical document, the audience would also like to be entertained from time to time. So use real life analogies, real life metaphors that can help explain complex, deep technical ideas into something more digestible, something more comprehensive. And once you have broken down all of these ideas into their bare essentials, you start building them back up with clarity. Once you've broken the problem into the core components, you explain each piece logically. How is it linked? What causes the other part? And clearly, you use real world analogies, like I said, if necessary, to ground the reader into abstract concepts. You ensure that the reader is not lost imagining abstract concepts to tie them down to something tangible. Now that you've done that, now that you've broken down complex processes into their bare essential parts and built them back up, you start to contextualize the actual data, the statistics. You always link the methodology or technical details back to the overall problem or objective. This keeps the writing grounded in its practical application and relevance. I understand, we analysts and technical communicators, we often get a little too indulgent in our own processes and analyses. There is no fall of grace in simplifying our processes and making them understandable, approachable for the general audience. And that does not take away from the complexity of the process. The analysis that you have done, the processes that you have undertaken still remain just as complex, they still remain just as robust. So breaking them down into their bare essentials in no way takes away from the rigor of data science that you have already practiced. So don't worry, you are not dumbing down an idea or you are not oversimplifying it. You are just making a general audience approaching the entire field of your data science or your entire analysis, you're making them feel welcome. You're making them feel at home with the new ideas that you are introducing to them. The third key approach is more focused on the craft of writing and the practice of writing. This is about iterative writing and revision. Like I told you in the very beginning, the point of the first draft is to not get perfection. I know that sometimes we may have that burden on ourselves. You have to ensure that every word is placed in the right order and every draft is precise to the very last extent. I know I've been there. I've kept that burden on myself, and trust me, it's gotten me nowhere. When you release yourself of that burden, you actually get good writing done. That's why an iterative writing process always works. Let's see what the purpose is. Just like data science models improve with iterations, writing also benefits from cycles of drafting, feedback, and revision. Writing is not a lonely pursuit, as the popular saying goes. You have to keep yourself surrounded by people who can give you clear, precise, and honest feedback that you can use to revise your documents and make them as effective as possible. Iterative writing strengthens the document's accuracy, clarity, and alignment with the audience's needs. Every single time that you make any change, any edit, any fine tuning, it ensures that people who are giving you the feedback are reading it from the audience's point of view. They are not reading it from within your own mind. They will tell you exactly what the reader may feel when they are reading through your entire document. So, listen to them. Pay heed to the kinds of challenges that they have while navigating through the information that you've provided to them. They will give you honest feedback, keep technical and non-technical audiences around you who can give you feedback, and work on it. Ensure that iterative writing only brings about better and better forms of drafts in future. I told you in the beginning that you can't grow grass and cut it at the same time. So don't keep the first draft with the pressure of making it absolutely perfect. The first draft, maybe by the time that your entire writing process is done, you may not even recognize the first draft of where you began. But the point of the first draft is to start. The point of the first draft is not to end. So we must ensure that our iterative writing process has to keep our growth in mind. It has to keep the development, the refinement of our message in mind. How do we actually get it done? Let's see the process. The first draft is for flow. You begin with a draft that emphasizes getting ideas on the page, right? The point of a first draft is not to get it right. It is to get it done, to have a dump of all the information on the page and to ensure that you'll end up fine-tuning, you'll end up trimming the unnecessary parts out, maybe segmenting them into paragraphs, into subheadings, into chapters. All that you know, all that you want to communicate needs to come out on the first draft for you to have a tangible mind map of what you want to communicate. Perfection is the enemy of production, like I often say. Aim for a logical flow of ideas instead of complex language. I understand vocabulary is often peddled as the strong suit of a communicator, but imagine this. If I use a word like recalcitrant in the middle of a lecture, you might have to pause and go refer to a dictionary. What's the use of complex, jargony language if I'm only showing off and you're not understanding what I actually want to say? What's the point of knowing the word cantankerous if I don't communicate exactly the emotion that I want to tell you? So don't focus on complex language. It is not a sign of intelligence. Clear writing is the sign of intelligence. And in case if you cannot get it in the first draft, welcome to the club. I know exactly what it feels like. This is why you seek feedback early on. You share drafts with those outside of the technical domain. Their feedback will reveal areas where clarification is needed or where assumptions may be too high. I know that if we are from the technical area, we often make those assumptions that, oh, of course, people might know these things. People might know what a program or what an SQL query, for example, people might know what an SQL query might mean. What if they don't? What if they don't understand these terms? You might have to test it with a bunch of people around you, both from the technical and non-technical domain, but more precisely from the non-technical domain, because those people will ensure that we don't make assumptions and we don't make mistaken judgments of common knowledge. Once you receive that feedback, you refine with precision. Based on the feedback, you revise the document. You focus on enhancing readability, improving transitions between sections, and sharpening the main insights. In case if there are wasteful paragraphs that are going on detours and tangents, remove them. Like I said, you don't need to waste your readers' time. If I can give you a real life analogy, you know how there is a Jenga tower, right? With those little blocks, the game that we play. There are some little blocks, the bricks, that you can remove and the tower will still stand. But there are some blocks that even if you touch them, the entire tower will start shaking up. Every single paragraph, if I can dare say, every single sentence of your writing has to be a load-bearing block like that. That if you touch it, the entire message of the draft starts shaking up. And every single time you find a block that you can remove, you should remove it so that the tower is standing only on its essential parts. Once you've done that, you proof for consistency. You start with what we know as proofreading. You might have known that term. You start proofing for consistency. You ensure that all the technical details are accurate and consistent throughout the document. Font sizes, punctuations, referencing styles, all of these things need to be accurate and consistent throughout the document so that the reader does not feel any jarring changes midway. I know that we work on a draft for a long period of time and sometimes we might have forgotten what font we began with or what font size we began with, right? Or what language we began with. So the proofreading is not only about correcting grammatical errors, it is also about ensuring consistency of style, substance, and referencing throughout the entire document. So that is why writing does not get done overnight. Writing also does not get done closer to the deadline. In case if you are students working on assignments, please seek feedback, please seek help so that writing becomes a collaborative process. Your audience can be beta tested, right? As we say in programming, there is always a beta testing mode where the audience gives you feedback and you can augment your writing and your messaging to achieve the desired results at the end. Now we come to the fourth point, emphasizing reader-centric writing. The point of reader-centric writing is understanding the audience's needs, background knowledge, and goals. It is critical in data science writing to always be accurate in estimating what the audience would need, how much would they know, and what would they hope to achieve upon reading your document. Your writing should be tailored to suit the technical expertise and informational needs of your readers, ensuring accessibility and relevance. Because sometimes the readers may be curious to learn from your work, but they may not know exactly what it is that you're talking about. So your job is not to speak from a position of authority in terms of knowledge. Your job is to take them by their hand and take them on a journey of discovery. And that is what true reader-centric writing feels like. Let's see what the process is. We first identify the audience's expertise level. Before writing, you assess whether the audience is technical, for example, data scientists or engineers, or they are non-technical, for example, executives, clients, or the general audience. When you first see the kind of role that they are playing as readers, you would be able to augment your communication to adjust the technical density of information. Then you tailor the tone and language based on their expertise level. For technical audiences, you use precise terms and deep explanations of models. However, for the non-technical audiences, you focus on high-level insights, minimizing jargon, and emphasizing the practical impact of the findings. This practical impact bit is extremely important. We'll dive deep into it later on, but let me tell you this much. They may not know the internal workings of the algorithm that have made you reach the conclusion, but they will definitely care about what role that conclusion plays in their life. How can they utilize the kind of insights that you have derived from your data analysis? Think about executives. They have to make a decision. They have to invest money, but they may not know how you have arrived at the actionable recommendations that you make to them. They would definitely know what to do with those recommendations. So the practical impact of your analysis has to be highlighted for a non-technical audience. You address what is relevant to the audience. Focus on the aspects of the analysis that matter the most to the reader. For a business audience, emphasize on return on investment or cost-saving insights. For a technical audience, focus on methods, algorithms, and optimization details. You serve the kind of curiosity and needs that your audience brings to the table, and you augment your writing to answer those questions, to answer those queries. That is the core of reader-centric writing. And in the end, we engage in data storytelling with a logical flow. Data storytelling is about transforming numbers into narratives that connect with the audience. A logical, compelling story keeps the audience engaged and drives them towards the key insights that you want them to grasp. But you have to ensure that the narrative is in no way purely for entertainment. It is not purely for shock value or for attraction. The narrative in this case has to communicate the insights and values that you want your data analysis to have. How do we do that? We first frame the problem. Think about it. Every story is an exercise in problem solving. The thirsty crow wants to quench its thirst, so he optimizes for a problem. You start with a clear problem statement or context to hook the reader's attention. You present the challenge or question that your data analysis will address. You may also have to justify why that question or that challenge matters and ensure that the reader is on the same page of relevance as far as your importance to the question is concerned and theirs as well. Then you start using a narrative arc. We know the word narrative arc as the journey of a story, right? So you structure your entire writing with a beginning, which is the problem or the introduction, the middle, which is the analysis and findings, and the end, which is the conclusions and recommendations. I would recommend that you check out the work of the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, who came up with this structure, that every story must have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It is also known as the classical three-act structure, and we will discuss more about this in our unit about data storytelling. You also highlight the key findings as story milestones. Every story that you and I love have certain turning points, right? We know them as plot twists. We know them as milestones in a story. So you identify the most important results that you have discovered and position them strategically in the narrative. You use them as turning points to drive home the impact of your analysis. In case the audience ever feels a little confused, every single time you provide context and implications. Don't just present raw data. Explain the meaning of that data. Answer the question, so what? Sometimes you may present a data without context and the audience will feel like, okay, so what? What do I do with this information? That question can make or break your analysis. If you can answer so what, the audience will be hooked once again. What are the broader implications of the findings and how do they influence decision making? You will have to think a little broader than just the narrow lanes of your analysis. The narrow lanes of your algorithm, your processes, your data analysis, and scientific findings have to be brought to a broader context so the audience can care about the insights that you have brought to the table. So that was it from my side for this lecture. We were looking at 5 key approaches that we need to develop as temperamental writers within the realms of data science. In the next class, we will start digging into all of this and more in detail, and we will treat each question with as much nuance as possible. Until then, stay curious and keep learning. All the best. Namaskar.